Hello friends, welcome back to the Python programming session. Till now we had looked into the basic programming concepts in Python programming language. Today let's move into the OOPS or the advanced Python programming concepts. So friends, what is the OOPS concept? OOPS refers to the object-oriented programming concepts. Its main concept is to work with objects, and so, what is an object mean? Object is nothing but a group of interrelated variables and methods. So, variables are referred to as the properties of the object, and methods are referred to as the behavior of the object. So, suppose if we take a mobile, the cost, its color, its brand, model number all represent the properties of the object. And when we consider the functionality, its performance, we mean that we are considering the behavior of the mobile object. So properties are nothing but variables and behavior are nothing but functions in the class or object. So this is the concept of working with classes and objects. And OOPS concept mainly covers classes, objects, method, inheritance, encapsulation, data abstraction and polymorphism. Let's take each thing in one session, in different sessions, and cover this particular concept. Firstly, in today's session, let's cover what a class means. So for this, let us see what a class refers to. We know that in functions, we have built-in functions and user-defined functions. Built-in functions are functions provided by the system, and user-defined functions are the functions returned by the user. Similarly, a class is a user-defined data structure. We have list tuples as data structure, and similarly class is a user-defined data structure. We can define the data structure on our own, so it is referred to as the user-defined data structure. And what does a class have? It is an entity which has variables and functions. Variables are also called attributes and functions are also called as methods. And variables are called properties of the class. As we saw previously, properties refer to cost, color, brand, model number of a mobile, and behavior consists of functionality, performance. So here variables, whatever variables we are defining in the class, it is the property of the class, and whatever methods or functions we are defining in the class, it is referred to as the behavior of the class. So both variables and properties together are called the class members. And what is a class? It is a blueprint of the object which is created. It's just like a blueprint or prototype of the object which we are creating later on. And as such, no memory location is allocated to the class. Only when we create an object, memory will be allocated to the class. And classes are created with the class keyword. So after covering classes, let's move on to object. Object is nothing but an instance of the class. It is created with the help of class constructor. It allocates memory to the variables and methods in the class. For a single class, we can have any number of objects. Okay, now let's take this example and see how it works in Python. So let me have my class which is equal to student. And let me have my school as a variable which is equal to Vidyalaya. And now let me have my method or behavior. So let me have my init function which takes in two parameters, that is student ID and student name. And then let me say self dot student ID because it's an instance variable. student ID equal to student ID and self dot student name is equal to student name. Now let me have another function called display, which takes self as the first parameter and it prints self dot student ID comma self dot student name. And now let me create my object C1 equal to student C1 dot display. Let me not run it. Let me define each and every parameter within this particular class function, within this particular class. So firstly, class is created with the class keyword. So class is the keyword over here. And student is the name of the class name. Student is the class name. Sorry, wait 1 second. Okay. Now I am saying school equal to Vidyalaya. This particular school is a variable to which Vidyalaya has been assigned. And what type of variable is it? It is a class attribute or a class variable because it is defined within the class and outside the init method. So we call it as a class attribute. So this school is nothing but a class attribute. Suppose we define the variables within the init method, then those particular variables are called instance attributes. If it is outside the init method, then it is a class attribute. And so now we have the definition init method. This is nothing but a behavior or it's a method. It's an instance method. And it takes self as the first parameter. Whenever the object is instantiated, it takes the self as the first parameter and it takes student ID, student name. Then with the help of the instance of the object which is created, the student ID will be assigned to self.student ID and student name will be assigned to self.student name. And now when we print self.student ID, self.student name, these both particular values will be printed. So this is just a blueprint. The class is just a blueprint and no memory is allocated to these particular items within the class. So when does the memory get allocated? Only when we create an object. Here C1 is the object which we are creating for this particular student class. So whenever we create an object for the class, then memory will be assigned to these particular variables and methods. So here C1 is the object and I am calling the student class. So object is created with the class constructor. So with the student constructor, the object is created and it passes two parameters, that is 1, 2, 3 and Sam. So self is the by default the first parameter. So student ID will now have the value 1, 2, 3 and Sam will have and student name will have the value Sam. And one more thing what we want to remember here is whenever an object is created, it first calls the init method. So the init method gets called first and it assigns the instance variables and then when we call the display function, it displays the values of those particular attributes. So friends, what we have to remember is a class is created with a class keyword and then a class name, and class attributes are defined outside the init method but inside the class, and instance attributes are created within the init method. And whenever we have self as the first parameter, it means to say it's an instance function. So these two functions are instance functions. And C1 is the object which is constructed with the help of the class constructor. So now suppose we take the first student ID as 123 and Sam. So school will have the value Vidyalaya. It is common for all the students, and the student ID changes for each and every student. So we write it as instance variables, and we define school as a class attribute because it is common for all the students. School name is common. Vidyalaya is common for all the students in the Vidyalaya school. And so when I run this particular program, firstly object will call the init method, and self.student id will have 123, and self.student name will be having equal to Sam. And now when I say c1.display, this method gets called and it will print self.student id and self.student name. So it should print c1.display. So now when I run this method for this program, it prints 1, 2, 3 and then Sam. So C1 is having the value equal to 1, 2, 3 and Sam. So this particular method is called and it displays C1, 2, 3 and then Sam. Now let's take another object which is called C2 equal to student 222 comma Ram. And now if I say c2.display, then it prints for the second object 222 as the ID and Ram as the student name. So student ID and name differs, but the school is common for each one of them. So we have to define it as a class attribute, and the student ID and name are created as an object. They're passed as an instance attributes. These are the instance attributes and this is the class attribute. For both the students, that is 123 and 222, the school name is the same, which is equal to Vidyalaya. So hope so friends, it is clear for you. Now let's recap it once again. A class is an entity which has attributes and methods. So what are the attributes? School is an attribute, student ID is attribute, student name is an attribute. And what are the methods? def init is a method and def display is the another method. Variables are called properties. These variables, that is school, student ID, student name, are all called as attributes. And init, display method are called behavior of the class. And both these variables and methods together are called as the class members. So these variables and the method together are called the class members. There is no memory allocation to the class definition. Only when we create an object, memory will be allocated. So as such, the class will not have any memory allocation. Only when we create an object, that is C1 or C2, memory will be allocated to the class variables and methods. Classes are created with class keyword. So class is created with the class keyword. So having covered this, now let's move on to object. Object is nothing but an instance of the class. So this particular object is an instance of this particular class. It is created with the help of class constructor. So student and then the constructor. So it is created with the help of the class constructor. Student is a class. And with the class constructor, the object is being created. It allocates memory to the attributes and methods. When an object is created, we are passing the values. So it allocates memory to these particular variables and methods. For a single class, we can have any number of objects. Here, for a single class student, I am having two objects. In the similar way, we can have any number of objects, n number of objects for a one particular class, or for one particular single class, we can have any number of objects. Now, what is init method? This init method is nothing but a class, it's a constructor method. It is the first method which is called when an object is instantiated. Whenever we instantiate an object, whenever we assign C1 equal to student 1, 2, 3 Sam, the first method which gets called is the init method. It allocates memory to the variables and methods. It assigns value to the data members of the class when an object of the class is created. So when we create an object, it assigns values to the members of the class. And now, what is a class attribute and what is instance attributes? Class attributes are created within the class but outside the init method. So it is created within the class but outside the init method. Whereas instance attributes are created within the init method. So it is created within the init method, and instance attribute changes for each object. See, for object 1, the instance attribute is 1, 2, 3 and Sam. For object 2, it is 2, 2, 2 and Ram. So it changes for each object, the instance attribute. But the class attributes remains the same for all the objects created for that particular class. So for each object, the instance attribute changes, whereas the class attributes remains the same for all the objects. So hope so friends, it is clear for you. If you have any doubts, please do reach to me out in the comment section. If you like my video, click on the like button and please do subscribe to get notifications of my new videos. Till then, see you. Bye bye.